Well, good morning. It's Labor Day weekend. You can tell. Apparently some people are laboring today because they're not here, but I hope they're enjoying themselves, even though in spite of the kind of the weather that's kind of supposed to be weird this weekend. Just a chance to, I hope some of you have, how many of you have Monday off? How many of you do not have Monday off? Raise your hands real light. Everybody said, oh yeah, we're sorry for that, yeah. It's supposed to be a national holiday, kind of the last reminder of thanking you for working. So thank you for working on the day when the rest of us are taking off. That's awful nice of you, yeah. Hey, we're going to be looking over the next 3 weeks at some retro practices that Jesus talked about. And in fact, when he talked about them, they were already retro practices. And his basic message to the people back then, and probably to us as well, was simply this idea that when we think about these 3 specific retro practices, we probably think there are certain things that are really important about them. And Jesus is going to say, what you think is so important about them probably really isn't. And in fact, what you don't think is important, in fact, what you may not even recognize, is really what's really important. And today we're going to talk about the very first retro practice, this idea of giving, but a very specific kind of giving. It's not giving to the church, it's not tithe and offering, that kind of stuff. So if you're worried that I'm going down that trail today, just take a deep breath and go, oh, okay, he's not. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that thing we call generosity. That sort of spontaneous kind of thing. I see this situation, I ought to do something for it. You know, it's when one of your relatives calls and says, I'm really in a tight bind and I need $200, any way I can get it. And you kind of go, they're not too bad of a person. I think I'm going to help out, Or you have that coworker and she's got that little box on her desk that has the candies for her kids' school or her kids' scouting program or her kids' summer camp or whatever it is. And every day you walk past, and because you're a good person, you always take a candy bar and you always leave some money. But today you think, I'm going to put a little extra just because I'm that kind of person, right? And we sometimes get this whole idea of generosity and giving mixed up. And what Jesus is going to talk about today is this idea about giving, but not outside of the context of a church, but just giving, being generous when you see a situation in need. Because all of us have had questions about that. I'm guessing all of us in this room have at some point in life driven along a road, come to a stop sign or a stoplight, and there was a person there with a little sign. And sometimes they're really nice signs, heartwarming signs, 3 kids at home, lost my job. And they always have a little catch at the bottom, God bless, whatever. And they'll come look at your door, Caesar, right? Knock, and you kind of look at your door, and then there's 3 different options, There's crank up the radio and just act like you don't even see him, right? There's the, kind of turn your head away, or there's kind of look at them and shrug, or if you got something you give. But you've all kind of wondered, what in that moment is the right thing to do? And if I do something, is it the right thing to do? Now, what is it going to have an impact? You've also wondered this when you've stood in line at some place and they have a tip jar out there, and you've gotten your order, or you've ordered your thing, and you think, I'm going to put a tip in, and you've taken the money out, and you start to put it in the jar, and you notice that nobody is looking at this moment. Anybody had that experience? And what goes through your mind is the question of, do I still put it in? Because nobody's going to see it, right? So, or should I wait, get everybody's attention and then, put the money in, because then I'm getting some kind of credit for it, or do I just kind of put it in my back of my pocket and say, well, the question really for all of us is, why do I give? What's the thing behind this? And that's what Jesus is going to talk about today. And in fact, it's back to the Sermon on the Mount that we spent this summer going through. And I'm going to take you back to something that Jesus said just a few minutes before he says what we're going to look at today. It's found over in Matthew chapter 5. And you may recognize this. If you've been around a church very much, you have heard this at some point. You have, seen this written someplace. You've seen it on posters. But it simply said, Jesus said, listen, let your light shine before others. That is for people to see. Let your light shine so that people can see it, so that they will see the good things you do, your good deeds, so they can see with the good stuff, and they will praise, that is, glorify, give honor to your Father in heaven. And so Jesus is, as he's talking on this day, and he's talking all these different stuff, he lays out that idea that we ought to do good things. And we ought to do it so people recognize that there's something good that we've done for them, and that they'll turn and thank God through that process. So maybe there is a rationale for you when you have your money and you're putting it in the tip jar, and nobody's looking to say, well, let me wait just a second, right? Let me get their attention so they'll know I'm doing something good for them, and maybe they'll go, oh, that's a really nice person. And I see the little Jesus fish on on their shirt, and they're out in their car in the parking lot as they leave. And so they must be a good person. Oh, thank you, God, for using this person. Right? So there's this concept out there that Jesus kind of says, listen, we ought to do good stuff for people, and we ought to do it so that people recognize that something is at work in our lives, that God is active in our lives, and that's how he's used. That's what he's done through all this stuff. But today, as we talk about giving and generosity, we're going to discover something different that may make some of us uncomfortable. Because the reason Jesus says we ought to do it is not the reason that we typically think is a really good reason to do it. But before we jump in today, I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, right? Father, on this weekend that we celebrate our work, and for at least some of us in this room and watching online, we get the day off. It reminds us again of just the impact of the things we do in our lives, the work we do, and even the good works, as we traditionally call it. And I just want to ask you today that as we talk about this, that you get beyond sort of the things we've always understood about giving or the reason we ought to be generous, and that we can hear you clearly as to what ought to motivate us and what at times does motivate us. And I pray that we can leave here today with not only a new idea, but a sense of your smile on our lives. Our imperfect, messed up, at times so unclear, at times so selfish, at times driven to do right, but for the best reasons we know, kind of lives we have. And I pray that we can begin to see how we live out these practices in a new way, as we discovered a better picture of who you are. So we ask you to bless this time and to fill this space just again with your presence in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along today, we're over in Matthew chapter 6, just the first 4 verses there. And here's what Jesus said. After telling them to do their works, let their light shine, so that people can see the good stuff and say, oh, thank you, God, for this person. Jesus says, by the way, be careful. Be careful when you do good things, that is your righteous deeds. Be careful. Which just seems kind of weird because he just said, do this kind of stuff, right? But he says, be careful. Don't do them, that is, parade them in front of people to be seen, that is, noticed by them. Don't do it, Jesus says. Now, you may be kind of think, well, he just said to do it. Now he's telling us not to do it. But Jesus is getting beyond. He wants us to do it, but he's saying there's something deeper behind the caution that we have there. And here's what he's talking about. Right? We all crave affirmation. And it starts early, Monica, and it starts often, right? Some point Junior's going to, watch me, mommy, 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 watch me, mommy, mommy, watch me, that's what it's going to be like. It starts there, and it keeps going, right? Those who've had kids, different stages. The watch me is a different kind of thing. But there's this attention. We all crave attention. We all like it when somebody comes up and says, hey, new hairdo, really looks cute. Well, they don't say that to me, but some of you think, oh, that's, it's really cute. Or, they'll say stuff like, hey, you've been working out, right? And even if you haven't been working out, you kind of suck in your stomach and go, a little bit, not, right? We crave this kind of attention. And Jesus knows that's part of our DNA. All of us like that. And it's not necessarily bad. It's just a reality that we crave. We crave it. And Jesus' point here is that we got to be careful in that craving, that we don't kind of misunderstand this whole, why I'm doing this stuff. The good stuff. Because here's the reality. And I told you this a couple weeks ago, right? I can prove this to you. Anytime somebody takes a group photo of you, take a little phone, everybody, smile, big smile, everybody smile back there, smile, click. And they say, you want to see it? Everybody, when you go up and look at that picture, who do you look to first? It's just who we are. And this is not necessarily like, oh, this is a bad thing. I mean, it's not a great thing, but it's not like sort of, it's just as who we are as people. In fact, you may know somebody like I know, who in their unselfishness is very selfish. You ever know somebody like this, My wife's around here somewhere, but I want to tell you a story. Yeah, it's one of those stories. Don't tell it? Okay, I won't say it. All right. So, but you all know, it had nothing to do with my wife, so it wasn't her. So let's get that clear, all right? But I'm going to leave it there because I followed wise advice this morning, all right? So I'm going to step back away from that. But we all kind of know, and so selfishness comes out in all sorts of different forms. And when Jesus says, listen, be careful, I want you to be careful that when you do your stuff, you don't kind of parade it in front of people to get noticed by them, because notice why he says it. If you do that, you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. That if you're trying for something here and you get that something here, you're going to lose out on something on the other end. Because if you're driven by that craving for attention, if you kind of say, look at me, everybody notice me, look at me today, woo, 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 and everybody notices you, you've gotten the reward you were after, but were you really giving something? Because he goes on to say this. Oh, actually, he doesn't say this. This is just the point of it. What's the purpose of doing good if no one notices? And that's our question, isn't it? It's the question when we're putting that money in that tip jar and nobody's looking, right? It's the question of, when I'm trying to do something nice for somebody, I want them to know that I did something, but I don't really want to know. And we kind of go through all this wrestling, all this mental gymnastics. And what Jesus is going to show us in these few words here, he's simply going to say this: how reveals why, which reveals what I value most. There'll be a test in this later, so follow again, all right? How I go about doing good, how I go about giving in this context, reveals why I give, which reveals what I value most in that giving. And that's why Jesus says we've got to be careful. Because if we're about kind of parading this stuff, if we're about kind of showing it up to get noticed, we will get noticed. We will have accomplished what we want. But Jesus will ask us, is that really what you were after when you did this kind of stuff? And he goes on to say this. When you give to the poor, and I want you to notice something. Jesus, this week and the next 2 weeks, when he talks about these sort of retro practices, he doesn't say you ought to do these things. He doesn't say it'd be a good idea to do these things. He just simply assumes that they're going to do this. That when you give to the poor, and in this context is this idea of giving alms. When was the last time you gave an alm? Anybody give an alm this week? It's not a word that kind of normally rattles around in our mind. But the idea is that when you give to somebody less fortunate, when you stop at that street corner and you give something to that person that's got that little sign. When you're traveling, sometimes you see this more in other countries. You go to some big tourist areas, Earl, and you'll see these, people will come up and they'll be, they won't have some legs, or they'll be blind, or you can tell and they're destitute and they're kind of coming up. And back then in the context, people would see these people, they would feel bad about them, they think, oh, somebody's got to do something, so they would give them a little bit of stuff. That was sort of just an accepted religious practice because somebody's got to take care of these people. There was no sort of welfare system, there was no way to, people had to take care of other people. So in the giving of alms, so Jesus just says, when you do this, because he expects them to do it, when you give to the poor, don't be like the hypocrites, because nobody wants to be like a hypocrite, right? And then he describes what they look like. They blow their trumpets, that is, blow their own horn. You may not have recognized that that's where that language comes from, but if you're not a religious person, by the way, when he's talking about somebody tooting their own horn, blow the horn, this is where it comes from. So Jesus says, they blow trumpets, they blow their own horn in the synagogues and on the streets, so that people will see them and honor, that is, admire them. So Jesus says, don't kind of be that. When you're giving it, don't kind of stop and say, hey, everybody, watch this. Oh, poor person. I feel so bad for you. Here's $1, he says, don't be like that. Don't try to kind of draw attention to this. This is really a group of religious people who wanted people to know how religious they were. And that's the danger for us as followers of Jesus. That in our craving for attention, it can seem good. We want people to know how committed we are. That we can become a group of religious people who want people to know how religious we are. Because if they know how religious we are, that'll make me feel good, and surely it will make God feel good. To which Jesus simply says, I tell you the truth. Those hypocrites already have their full reward. Because they got what they were after. They wanted attention, they got attention. But here's the crazy thing. They thought they were giving to the poor, but because of what was the drive, the why reveals the how, that whole thing, they were giving in order to get. So they weren't really giving to the poor, they were using the poor to get what they wanted. And so this was not about any giving. That's what we miss sometimes. We think, oh, they were giving. No, they weren't giving. They were all about getting. They were all about getting attention themselves. So Jesus says, when you, not them, but when you give to the poor, don't let anyone know what you are doing. That is, your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Now, this is a great reminder that we don't, and we shouldn't always read the Bible just plainly literally. Because I can show you something. Everybody take out there, put your right hand and your left hand out in front of me, right? How is it possible for your left hand to not know what your right hand's doing? Is that possible? The answer is no, right? I mean, you can turn your head away. I don't want to see what my right hand's doing, but as soon as I open it, I know something happened, right? You can put your hands down. That's good. But this is where it reminded, just it's not literally, because how can you possibly, how can I say, I'm going to give to the poor, but I'm not going to show what my hand's doing? So do I just carry around a bunch of bills and just kind of trust whatever happens and hope somebody, No. His point is simply, don't let anyone know what you are doing. This is not about yourself not knowing what's happening. It's about how you present things. Because notice what Jesus says next. Your giving should be done in secret. This is a private thing. Now, he's not talking about telling the poor person, by the way, I'd like to give you some money, but I only do this stuff in private, so hey, meet me around the corner over here, make sure nobody's following you. I'll give you something. That's not his point here. His point, again, is about why we do what we do. What's the motivating factor behind it? Because then Jesus says this incredible thing. Your Father can see what is done in secret. That is private. Your Father can. And a lot of you, when you've heard this verse before, it has been this idea that God is watching you. Right? So you better watch out. Because he's always watching you. You thought you were getting away while I was looking over here, right? But what if the reason that God is watching you is not so much to catch you doing something wrong as it is watching you to affirm what's going right in your life? See, it's so easy in our guilt and in our shame and in our failures and our fumbling and all the stuff that happens in our sin to feel like God is out to get us. To feel like I deserve to be in this spot, to deserve, whatever comes, but I shouldn't be in this place, but now he's kind of looking at me, and now I find myself there. But Jesus seems to say this is not watching us to catch us doing bad, as much as him watching us to affirm what's good in our lives. Because notice what he says last. Not only does your Father see what is done in secret, that is in private, he will reward you. He will reward you. Which brings us back to that question we asked before. What's the purpose of doing good if no one notices? And Jesus' answer is, God notices. Now, our struggle is with the word reward, isn't it? We kind of think that, if I'm motivated to just purely altruistic motives, I'm just there, I'm just doing good, I'm not expecting any kind of reward. I just ought to do good because because it's the right thing to do, and I shouldn't be expecting any reward. I'm not wanting any reward. I just want to do what's right. I want to bring honor to God. I don't look for any kind of reward. Our struggle is really the idea of reward, isn't it? And here's our problem. Jesus says God will reward us. And it's amazing when you look at what this word means in the original language. Reward meant to give away, that is to give up, or to give over, or to give back. That was to deliver again, give again. I love this last one. It could mean to pay somebody. It could be repay somebody. It could be repayment. It can recompensate. It could be to restore. It could be reward. It carries all these kinds of ideas that when Jesus says, your Father sees all the stuff in secret, and he recognizes that, so you're not losing any kind of reward. It's just about who are you trying to make happy? Who are you trying to bring attention to? But the feeling of reward feels so weird because we think, that doesn't sound very holy. Doesn't sound very Christian to be after reward. But Jesus' point is, the hypocrites seem to be after reward and they got theirs. They wanted to be noticed, they got noticed. But didn't get any credit from God. And I think what he's telling us is that if we could understand that giving and generosity is not about a reward, and it's not about who gets credit. It's about something good happening for that person. Giving them some kind of hope, even if it's just that I'm going to eat today. And our struggle tends to be, if I give $5 or $10, if I give a $20 to that person at the street corner, what are they going to do with that money, right? Because some of you know they're going to go out and buy some smokes, buy some beer, buy some wine in a box. Might go out and buy a ham sandwich and follow it up with a Coke. And I'm not going to be part of contributing to that kind of lifestyle. You notice Jesus doesn't say anything about the person's motive who you're helping? Because it really has nothing to do with them. I mean, he's not asking us to be stupid with this stuff. What he is after is for us to discover where are our hearts in this whole idea of generosity. With these spontaneous sort of, I see a need and I step in to fill that need. And what am I after in it all? And the fact that we're bothered by Jesus saying God's going to reward you is actually not a bad thing. Because maybe it reminds us that that's not what we're after. But it is also a question of what do you do in those moments? When your dollar is just about to drop into that tip jar and nobody's looking. Are you willing to drop that in and throw another 10 in there without anybody seeing? See, Jesus looked at that group on that hillside that day who thought they understood this idea of generosity and of giving, of helping the poor. And he reminded them that the example they had grown up with was not the example that was accomplishing what they thought it was accomplishing. Because those people who they thought were really great givers were actually really great getters. In Jesus' point, they got what they wanted. They wanted attention, they got it. They wanted credit, they got it. But he said for us, we need to be careful. Because it's so easy to go down that track and miss out the greater track. Which is do things quietly, do things behind the scenes, do things at the right time in the right place, and let God figure out what the reward is. Because you notice, Jesus never defines what that reward is, does he? He just simply says, your Father's watching you. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And when he sees you doing something good, you're going to get a reward for that. I can't tell you what that reward is, because Jesus didn't tell us what it is. There's a great quote I ran into this week in getting ready from Anne Lamott. She got some great stuff, a little gritty, but really good stuff. This is I love this. She says, listen, unto us, that is us, so much is given. Is that true? So she's kind of setting the context. To us, so much has been given. We just have to be open for business. God just gives to us, to you and me. I mean, look at us, yikes. God keeps giving, forgiving, and inviting us back. And I love that picture. I love this idea that we just have to be open for business. And the business of a follower of Jesus is to follow Jesus. The business of a follower of Jesus is to take seriously the words of Jesus, the cautions of Jesus, the warnings of Jesus. And so when he says, be careful of when you help somebody. Be careful that you really are about giving and leaving the reward up to God. Resist the urge to get a little affirmation, a little of appreciation, a little bit of notice now, because a lot will come later.